You are listening to Mining Stock Education.
We see that we're validating our geophysical targets on surface, and then we're looking for similar signatures at depth. And what we've been able to map so far is quite large systems. But most importantly, it's refining, a 3 by 2 kilometer scale target down to 1.5 kilometers, focusing us in on the most important areas or volumes of rock that we think are the highest probability to make a discovery.
We see at least 40 holes worth being drilled across the 4 big targets, as a starting point.
Thank you for tuning in to Mining Stock Education. I'm your host, Bill Powers, and in today's show, we're going to get an update from our sponsor, Coppernico Metals. Ivan Bebek, Chair and CEO, joins me, as well as Tim Kingsley. The second time on the show. It's been a year, Tim. You're the VPX. You're overseeing the geological exploration program for the Sombrero project in Peru for the company. Now, you just completed a gravity survey, magnetic survey, and you have refined your large-scale skarn and porphyry targets. You got multi-kilometers of targets you've laid out here. I'd like to get your take on that, Tim, but before I do, Ivan, could you introduce us to Tim? Because it's been a year since he's been on the show. Why is he the one that's chosen to lead this program?
Well, he's the reason why I'm smiling. And he's the reason why we're so excited, because he's done a tremendous job on the project. Tim has had a lengthy career in Peru as well as in Canada, but in different places with base metal exploration. Tim joined us a few years back as VP of Exploration, and he's really flipped Sombrero on its side with new ideas, and he's refined a lot of great ideas that existed there prior. Tim hasn't been on a lot because he had to get familiar with the rocks, learn the targets. And, in terms of speculating, I like to speculate a lot more than Tim does, but he's been my source of excitement on everything. And he carries a very, very disciplined, prudent approach. And he's been able to identify some really, really, really good targets, as you've seen in the press release. And he's got some great ideas going forward. So I'll turn it over to Tim. This is an exciting project, world-class scale. And Tim, why don't you talk a bit more? Maybe I'll give it to you guys.
Tim, could you, as you preface these targets, maybe give us your takeaways of phase 1 drilling from last year, those 20 holes? Could you give us your perspective on that as you lead into these new targets?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. I mean, the way exploration works is it's always an iterative process. And in our case, where we have a lot of post-mineral cover, some of our key levers that any exploration program uses, like geochemistry and just straight up mapping, they're limited. There's not as much leverage that you can pull off of those. And so one of the very first things you have to do is use geophysics, and then follow that up with drilling to try to figure out what's going on in the subsurface. Drilling sort of like creating your own outcrops, essentially, but in a very small space. That drill program was really instrumental for us. We were testing a couple geologic ideas and some geophysical ideas. We had some geophysical data sets and geochemistry, and we wanted to go see what we could figure out from the data we already had. And the results of that were really significant. It proved up a very large and complex porphyry skarn system, which we kind of already were suspecting, but it gave us a lot more detail of that. It started to explain some of the three-dimensional architecture of what's going on within that skarn system. And importantly for us, where we have so much cover, we need to use geophysics to try to infer geology at depth. And so we were able to start to make some correlations between geologic features and geophysical signatures. And so based on all of that work from the first phase of drilling, we decided we needed to go back and collect some new data sets. That was a better magnetic and refined magnetic data, as well as we realized that density, gravity data could be quite useful for us. And so we collected those data sets along with high-resolution topography, photogrammetry. That's allowing us to have a lot greater confidence in our interpretation of the geology in 3D, particularly predicting what the geology is in the subsurface. And importantly, gravity is mapping really dense rocks versus less dense rocks. We know that our skarn mineralization is quite dense. Often mineralization is associated with magnetic minerals, and so it can be quite magnetic, not always. And so by collecting these data sets that have a lot of we have a lot of confidence in, and then inverting them and trying to see what it looks like in a three-dimensional space, we've been able to define some really large and really interesting targets. And most importantly, where we do have windows of mineralization on surface, like at Fiorraso and a few places at Neok, we're seeing that signature. We're seeing clear signatures on surface where there's an overlap of density and magnetics, or overlap of density, magnetics, and chargeability. We see that we're validating our geophysical targets on surface, and then we're looking for similar signatures at depth. And what we've been able to map so far is quite large systems. There's going to be more work to be done in that, but quite large targets. They're going to take a decent amount of drilling, but most importantly, it's refining a 3 by 2 kilometer scale target down to 1.5 kilometers, focusing us in on the most important areas or volumes of rock that we think are the highest probability to make a discovery.
Tim, you're using as your analog Las Bambas. So are you looking at their historic data when it comes to geophysics and magnetic surveys to help you narrow these targets?
Certainly, to a degree. I mean, there's not a significant amount of public data available on those kinds of things. But anywhere in the Andalusiari belt, Las Bambas is a nice clear one for us. But there's Tintaya, Antapampa, Corocohuayco, quite a few other significant occurrences or deposits throughout the Andalusiari belt. And so, yeah, we're using all of those ideas and methods, and there are similar methods to, gravity was, I think, integral in at least a couple of those discoveries, in addition to magnetics.
See, just a point there, a good point Tim's made up, like our land position is quite large, over 55,000 hectares. And, we talk often about a Las Bambas analog. It's great recognition, it's a major mine that occurs up there. But all the other mines that Tim just mentioned, our thesis is that we are extending the whole belt to the west by 200 kilometers, and we might have 3 or 4 mines versus one. There's a plethora of targets in our land position, but they do represent characteristics that are similar to all of those mines next door, which vary slightly. So that's a big takeaway here for everybody listening. Our first targets are very exciting. They have great scale, as Tim just mentioned, a lot of collaborative data from on the surface and beneath the surface. But when looking at Sombrero as a whole and what this could be, we think of it as a multi-generational discovery opportunity to find multiple different mines that occur next door.
Tim, when you talk about, just to make this simple for non-technical investors, skarn is going to give you the grade, and then the porphyry gives you the scale. Are those the key takeaways for non-technical investors?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good summary of it at a high level. Skarn can be quite high grade, high concentration of metal in a small area, and that's what we're targeting first and foremost. But then these bigger, more diffuse systems can have broad mineralizing envelopes around them that are also economic.
You mentioned how these surveys are giving you an inferred look into the ground, but I believe at the 2 targets, right, Fiorraso and also Neok, you actually have a little bit, it's not deep, but you do have a little bit of the third dimension through historic hole and channel sampling, right?
Yeah, that's right. Fiorraso has some historic drilling, 8 drill holes over a very small strike length, 200 meters. But it proves mineralization continues. The system, is quite predictable at that small scale, down to at least 200-300 meters below surface. At Neok, no drilling yet, but the surface channel sampling has been really, really positive, and there's a lot of similarities between those two occurrences on surface in style of mineralization, location with respect to intrusions, and other features like that. And then layer that on the geophysics, which is quite similar as well.
Ivan, for phase 1 drilling, I know that you were not planning every hole exactly. You were waiting to see at what came back in the core as you planned your next holes. With this plan, and you've done all this survey work, are you going to be more aggressive, not just send out one drill, but perhaps multiple drills? Is that what you're conceiving?
Yeah, it's a good question. The permit we're applying for right now the bigger permit, we have a permit. We can start drilling tomorrow. We're not going to yet because we're not quite ready, but we're very close. But the bigger permit that we hope to achieve here in the next few months, it will give us the chance to use multiple rigs. I'm not going to put a specific number, but we, collectively, and Tim, you can add to this as much as you want, we see at least 40 holes worth being drilled across the four big targets, as a starting point. So there's no shortage of targets to drill. We all know time is money. And if we get the right capital from the right investor that we're looking to do here in the not too far future, we certainly will scale up the drill rigs and try to get as much information to the market in a compressed period of time. So we can all bet and speculate and get rewarded for the discovery should it be there. But these are big targets. And I like a point that Tim's made, took a 3.2 kilometer target, turned into 1.5, much more accurate or focused, precise targeting. The scale of Neok versus Furasso is quite a bit larger in scale than Furasso's outcrop, but we don't know to what depth extent Furasso goes. We don't know to what extent it expands because it runs into cover, much like Neok. These are just windows that you have, preferably or hopefully tip of the iceberg, and there's a big amount of, deposit will be underneath it. But it's encouraging. And you brought up a point about skarn for grade and porphyry for volume. I mean, the dream is to get volume and grade with skarn, and there's certainly a lot of strike length to go and test, but the big porphyry potential in this environment, everything is at surface or right below surface. So it'd be, a very, very amenable mining scenario. But the infrastructure of the project is also really high. So you can access the project on a road. There's power lines over the project. There's water. All the key elements are there. So whatever we find, in terms of big or small, the grade's going to matter, but it's going to become very profitable at higher grades as we've seen so far. My biggest thing is, and I'm sure Tim's of the same mindset, if we can repeat the grades we see on surface, continuously at depth and along strike, we're going to be talking pretty serious discoveries here in the next 12 to 18 months as we drill it. There's no limit to the drill program. We just know there's at least 40 holes. And Tim, I don't know if you feel comfortable with that number that should be drilled in the next phase of drilling.
Would you like to add any more color to that, Tim?
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to be quite aggressive on the drill front. It's going to be always drilling for discovery, but similar to the phase one program, there's going to be a lot of secondary information that is going to be quite important to guide how we drill and where we go next. And I would just like to add that, we're talking also about getting to drill our Tipicancha target. That's a completely different system, a younger mineralizing system. It's reflective of our ethics or ideas of developing a pipeline of targets, not just one target. And the prospectivity is really interesting there because we're looking at a whole younger system, multiple events of mineralization potential in a single area. That's going to be our very first time trying to even understand what those systems are, and the first drill holes are going to be incredibly interesting. I'm not sure that discovery comes out of the first 5 holes there, but it's going to tell us a significant amount to give us the right information to make that next leap. So 40 holes is going to be quite easy. Just Furasso alone and just Neok are going to take a lot of meters out of that.
Anything you could say about Antapampa that's also referenced in the press release? Sure.
Antapampa is sort of our northern extension of Neok, and we're not really sure how they relate. So we've named it something different, but it may be all part of the same bigger system. In the geophysical data sets, we see the southern end of it, which is largely undercover, showing some anomalies in magnetics and in gravity. We don't have very much IP data over that area. On surface, a little bit further to the north, where we do have some outcrops, we're seeing intrusions, classic skarn alteration with iron magnetite skarn, relatively lower grades right now on surface, but we're quite limited on outcrop there. So that's going to be an area that we absolutely have to explore with the drill rig. That's kind of the only way we get to see what's going on there. It's got similar potential to the rest of the property, though.
Ivan, timing of the program is contingent on future financing and solidification of the permits?
Yeah, so a couple things there. We're in discussions with a few potential strategic investors that would certainly give us more than enough capital to get going here. Based on timing of a lot of moving parts, it looks like third week of April, ish, around there, give or take a few weeks before we turn drills, and that would assume that we're topped our treasury by then, and we're well on our way. The big permit that we've all talked about, we're waiting for, we're hoping to receive it sometime in May, June, give or take a month, either direction. There's been an impeachment of the Peruvian president. There's an election coming up in April that can slow things down a little bit. We are still on track. Things are still advancing with our permits. And as of right now, what we plan to do is to drill the areas that we've identified, and you see some of it in today's press release around the north end of Bambas by the Chumpy target, and test some of those areas as we get those permits to drill Furaso and Tipicancha and work towards the Neok area. We are expanding community access agreements. We are working on additional permits in the background. And what our mandate is right now is to get access to everything we're talking about here, as well as bring some more targets in the pipeline in the next 12 to 18 months. And that would give investors a massive, massive upside on a much more focused program. When looking back at the first 20 holes, and what we drilled, the statement, and Keenan Jennings was on our board at the time, and we all adhered to it, is drill for knowledge. And, having the discipline to stop that program and watch our treasury and use the rest of it to do the appropriate studies, as you're seeing here, to increase the probability of discovery is really intelligent in hindsight on our part. And just the way we want to approach this project is walk before we run. The exciting part now, though, as you're hearing and seeing today, is that we have enough targets that we can do a lot of testing, discovery focused testing right out the bat as we get started. And when you look at that and you look at the potential for performance, as Tim described Tipicancha as something entirely new, I think we have some windows of 20 plus meters of 0.6 copper on surface in a sea of pyrite, has great geological implications, and the geophysics have complemented that further. It by no means guarantees a discovery, but it gives us a pretty big swing at the bat. And to be drilling things like that have the strike length and the scale alongside some probable things, it's truly like a really once in a lifetime, a dream property to have to go explore. What could go better would be more drills earlier and get all the answers as quick as possible. But there is going to be certainly a level of discipline, and as Tim pointed out, where we will be learning as we're drilling, and we'll be adjusting all of our programs as we do that. But in the key of these big projects, when you find the right signal in your geophysics and the right rock type that is mapped on surface or coincides with that, things can go pretty quick and can get exciting quick. The best part about the big targets is they have some incredible grades above them. And that's, as a speculator, that's what you want to see and hear. So it's been 10 years. It's been a real wait to get here. We've gone through a few iterations of ourselves to get to this point, but the way it all came together here at the end has been more than worth it, even though the share price hasn't exploded to big profits yet. Looking at the backdrop of the macro picture and the micro picture for copper and price movement, I don't think we could have planned this better, had we known the copper market would react in the perfect timing with all of our permits and drilling. But we are hitting a perfect storm. We're going to have a lot of swings at the drill bit here, 12 to 18 months minimum of exciting exploration drilling and new targets, and we'll see how it goes.
And Ivan, any plans to uplist in New York? I know you're on the big board in Toronto, but because New York is looking for copper discoveries and copper production, is there any plans for that in this year?
A few of my companies that I've been involved in, Keegan was on New York, Oren was listed on New York, Fury's listed on New York. We certainly would love to be listed on the New York NYSE Amex exchanges we've been before. Just access to capital and investors, to make it a lot more easy for people to invest into it. Once we get there, there's certain requirements. Price does it, and so just got to drill a couple good holes, and we should be well on our way.
I mean, I think we've got a great opportunity. Any one of these things is more than enough for a junior company if you're comparing us to other companies out there, and we've got multiple of them that we're going to get to drill this year. I mean, that's a incredibly compelling story.
Excellent. The company Coppernico Metals is a show sponsor, and you can find more information at CoppernicoMetals.com. Gentlemen, thank you for coming on the show today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.